Her poor girl is playing picnic in a park with empty plates. The young billionaire approaches and asks what she's doing. She answers, "My mom said that if I pretend I'm eating, it helps with the hunger." In silence, she hands him a note, and what was written leaves him in shock. It was 3:30 in the afternoon when Grant Foster decided to leave the office. He didn't say anything to anyone. He didn't need to. As the director of the chain of hotels founded by his father, no one would question his movements. He put away some papers, turned off his computer, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. The driver offered to take him, but Grant declined with a simple gesture. He wanted to walk. He needed to walk. The downtown streets were as crowded as ever, people in a hurry, cars honking, the city in its constant motion. Grant walked on autopilot, his thoughts somewhere else. That morning's meeting with the shareholders had been tense. Numbers, statistics, profit forecasts. Everything revolved around money, always money. He walked for 20 minutes until he found the entrance to an old park. It wasn't one of those modern, well-planned parks. It was a piece of forgotten nature in the middle of the city, with old trees and lawns that needed more care. Grant wasn't sure why he went in. Maybe for the tranquility, maybe for the contrast with the excessive shine of the hotels he managed. "At least here, no one expects anything from me," he murmured to himself, following a stone path. His tie was starting to bother him. Grant loosened the knot and opened the top button of his shirt. He felt suffocated, but not just because of his clothes. There was something else, an invisible weight he had been carrying for so long that he no longer noticed. Or pretended not to notice. The park was almost empty at that hour. A few elderly people played chess on concrete tables. A man walked his dog. 2 women chatted on a distant bench. Grant walked a bit further, to a quieter area, under the shade of an old oak tree. That was when he saw it. A small girl was sitting on a patched blanket spread out on the grass. The blanket was faded and had a few poorly sewn mends. The child had dark and curly hair tied back in an improvised ponytail. She wore a worn-out blue dress. In front of her were 3 shallow plates, empty, and a few plastic cups, also empty. Grant stopped, observing the scene. The girl carefully arranged the empty plates, then picked up a cup and pretended to drink something. She put the cup back on the ground, took an invisible fork, and moved it around in the empty plate as though she were eating. For some reason, Grant couldn't move on. He stood there, watching. The girl seemed alone. He looked around and saw no adult nearby, just the child, her patched blanket and the empty plates. Then the girl looked up and saw him. For a moment, their eyes met. Grant felt something strange at that moment, a kind of recognition that made no sense. "Hi," he said, almost without realizing. The girl didn't reply. She just lowered her head and continued her game with the empty plates. Grant didn't know what to do. Continuing on his way seemed like the sensible option. After all, what did a child playing in a park have to do with him? But there was something about that scene that bothered him. The empty plates, the patched blanket, the girl's loneliness. He took 2 hesitant steps toward her. "Excuse me? Are you here by yourself?" The girl lifted her eyes again. They were large and dark, with an intensity that didn't match her age. "My mom went to look for work," she finally said in a low, steady voice. "Oh, I see." Grant nodded, still unsure what to do. "And what are you doing?" The question came out naturally, almost as though he were talking to a friend's daughter. But Grant had no children, nor many friends with children. His life revolved around meetings, business, and the occasional social event that always ended in talk about work. The girl looked at the empty plates, then back at Grant. "I'm having a picnic. My mom said that if I pretend I'm eating, it helps the hunger go away." There was something in the simplicity of that answer that touched Grant in a way he hadn't expected. A picnic. With empty plates. "That sounds fun," he commented, trying to sound casual. "Can I ask what you're eating?" The girl shook her head negatively. "I'm not really eating," she said, as if explaining something obvious. "I'm just pretending." Grant felt a tightness in his chest. Something was wrong with this scene. A child alone in a park, pretending to eat from empty plates. "What's your name?" he asked, stepping a bit closer. The girl hesitated before answering. "Callie." "Callie?" That's a pretty name. Grant smiled slightly. I'm Grant. He wasn't sure why he was introducing himself to a stranger's child in a park. He wasn't the type to chat with strangers, let alone with children. But something about this girl, about the situation, kept him from simply walking away. Callie watched him with keen eyes, as if evaluating whether she could trust him. Then, to Grant's surprise, she opened the small, worn backpack at her side and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My mum says pretending helps, Callie said, extending the paper toward him. But I think this is better. Grant frowned, confused. He took the folded paper and slowly opened it. It was a note written in a childish hand, but perfectly legible. Please help me. I'm tired of pretending to eat. I'm really hungry. The impact of those words was physical. Grant felt as though he had been punched in the stomach. He reread the note, trying to process what he was seeing. He looked up at the girl. Callie was staring at him with a mixture of hope and shame. That was when Grant noticed the details. The slightly hollow cheeks of the girl, the thinness of her arms. Her clothes were clean but worn, and something in her eyes, a kind of weariness no child should ever know. Callie, he began, trying to keep his voice steady, have you not eaten today? The girl shrugged. We had a piece of bread for breakfast. My mum said she'd bring something when she got back. But she's taking a while. Grant looked around. The park was still practically empty. There was no sign of any adult looking for a child. Can you wait here for just a minute? He asked, folding the note and putting it in his suit pocket. Just 1 minute, I promise. Callie nodded seriously. Grant walked quickly toward the park entrance, where he had seen a few food stands. His heart pounded, and his hands trembled slightly. He had never felt like this. It wasn't just pity or compassion. It was an urgency he didn't recognize, an almost primal impulse to do something immediately. He reached the first stand and ordered 2 full sandwiches, a large portion of fries, 3 apples, 2 bottles of water, and 1 of juice. The vendor looked curiously at the man in a suit ordering so much food but said nothing. Grant paid, grabbed the bags, and hurried back into the park. For a moment he feared that the girl had disappeared, that she had been just an illusion caused by fatigue or stress. But Callie was there, still sitting on the same patched blanket, carefully arranging the empty plates as though it were the most important thing in the world. I'm back, Grant said, approaching. I brought some things for us to eat. Callie's eyes widened when he began taking the food out of the bags. She stayed still, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Is this all for me? She finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. Grant felt a lump in his throat. For both of us, he corrected gently. And there's more for you to take to your mom. Is that okay? Callie nodded, still looking shocked. Grant placed one of the sandwiches on a plate and offered it to her, along with the juice bottle. You can eat slowly. There's no need to rush. The girl took the sandwich with both hands. Her small hands trembled slightly. She took a cautious bite, then a bigger one. Grant noticed she was trying to keep herself from devouring the food all at once. Is it good? He asked, sitting at the edge of the blanket. Callie nodded, her mouth too full to reply. There was something so simple and yet so profound about that moment. A child eating a sandwich in a park. Something that should be normal, routine, but felt extraordinary under the circumstances. Grant unwrapped his own sandwich, but found he wasn't hungry. How could he be, after what he had just learned? Still, he took a few bites, not wanting Callie to feel watched or judged as she ate. My mum will like this, Callie commented after a while, pointing to the second sandwich still in the bag. She almost never eats out. Where do you live, Callie? Grant asked, trying to sound casual. The girl hesitated before answering. In a car. Now. 2 words that told an entire story. In a car. Now. It meant it hadn't always been that way, that there was a time when Callie and her mother had a real home. I see, Grant said, though he really didn't. He had never gone through anything like that. He had grown up in big houses, studied at the best schools, always had what he wanted and needed. Even when his father was difficult and distant, Grant had never lacked food or shelter. Callie finished the sandwich and started on the fries, one at a time, as if she wanted them to last longer. Her eyes looked brighter now, less dull. "Do you work near here?" she suddenly asked. Grant smiled at her directness. "Yes, I have an office downtown. I work with hotels. What do you do in the hotels?" Grant hesitated. How to explain his job to a child? How to say he spent his days in meetings, reviewing spreadsheets, worrying about occupancy rates and profit margins? "I help take care of them, so people have a good place to stay when they travel." Callie nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "That sounds nice, working in a hotel. My mom used to work in one." Grant felt a surge of interest. "Really? What did she do?" "She cleaned the rooms, put flowers and chocolates." Callie smiled at the memory as though it was a happy one. "Sometimes she brought me extra chocolates." Grant nodded, absorbing the information. A housekeeper, probably laid off during the pandemic or due to budget cuts. It was a common story, but it took on a different dimension when seen through Callie's eyes. "And now she's looking for a job?" "Yeah," Callie answered, taking another fry. "She goes out every day, says she'll find something, but it's hard." There was a mix of hope and resignation in the girl's voice that made Grant uncomfortable. No child should know this constant feeling of uncertainty. "Your mum sounds like a very strong person," he commented. Callie smiled. "She is. She tells me stories every night, even when she's tired, and she always says things are going to get better." Grant felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. He didn't know how to name this feeling, but it was different from anything he had experienced before. It wasn't pity, nor was it just compassion. It was something deeper, more primal, a human connection that seemed to transcend all the social and economic barriers separating their realities. "Callie, I think your mom is right. Things are going to get better." The girl shrugged, a surprisingly adult gesture for someone so young. "Maybe. She always says that." They ate in silence for a few minutes. Grant discreetly watched Callie, noticing how controlled her movements were, how she set aside part of the food without touching it, probably to save for later or to share with her mom. "So you can eat everything," he said gently. "I brought more for you to take." Callie seemed relieved by his permission. "Thank you." Such a simple word, but spoken with so much sincerity that Grant felt something break inside him, a barrier he hadn't even known existed. There, sitting on a patched blanket in a forgotten park, sharing a meal with a girl he'd just met, Grant Foster felt more real than he ever had in any business meeting or fancy restaurant dinner. "Do you come to this park often?" he asked, wanting to keep the conversation going. "When it's not raining," Callie replied, carefully opening the juice bottle. "It's safer than staying in the car alone, and there's fresh air." Grant nodded, imagining what it was like for a child to spend hours in a parked car, waiting for her mother to return from job interviews. The unfairness of it all hit him hard. "You know, Callie, I like this park too," he said, though it was the first time he'd ever been there. "Maybe I'll come back tomorrow. Will you be here?" A casual question, but loaded with enormous weight. Grant realized he wanted to help, not just today, not just with one sandwich, but truly help change the situation for this girl and her mother. Callie studied his face for a moment, as though searching for signs of deceit or falsehood. After a moment, she nodded. "I think so, if it doesn't rain." "Then maybe we'll see each other again," Grant smiled. "We could have another picnic, a real one this time." A small smile appeared on Callie's face, lighting up her eyes. "I'd like that." The sun was beginning to set. Grant checked his watch. He had spent nearly an hour with Callie. The office felt so distant now, as though it belonged to another life. "I need to go now," he said, standing up. "Your mom will probably be back soon, right?" "She always comes back before dark," Callie replied, busy tucking away the extra sandwich and fruit in her small backpack. Grant hesitated. The idea of leaving a child alone in a park bothered him, but Callie seemed used to it, and he didn't want to be there when the girl's mother returned. Not now, not without a plan to truly help. "Will you be okay?" Callie looked at him with those big eyes, so wise beyond her years. "I'll be fine, I always am." Grant nodded, swallowing hard. There was so much resilience in that child, so much strength in such a small body. "See you tomorrow then," he said, taking a few steps away. "Same time?" "Same time," Callie confirmed, returning to organize her plates, which were now no longer empty. The crumbs of bread and leftover fries were like treasures in her little collection. Grant walked away along the stone path, feeling strangely light yet carrying a new weight on his shoulders. Upon exiting the park, he took out his phone to check the time. He had spent nearly an hour with Callie, an hour that somehow felt more meaningful than all of that day's meetings. The note was still in his pocket. Grant pulled it out and reread Callie's small handwriting. "Please help me. I'm tired of pretending to eat. I'm really hungry." Something had changed, not just for Callie, who now had a full stomach, but for Grant as well. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he felt a strange warmth inside, as though a part of him that had been dormant for a long time was beginning to awaken. For the first time in years, Grant Foster felt that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than financial statements and occupancy rates. Grant returned to the park the next day, and the next, and the one after that. For an entire week, he found a way to slip out of the office for an hour, always at the same time. He always brought something to eat. Sandwiches, fruit, juice, sometimes sweets. Callie was there each time, sitting on the same patched blanket, playing with the same empty plates. That Thursday afternoon, the sky was especially blue. Grant brought a different snack, chocolate milkshakes and fries, and watched Callie's face light up when she saw the treats. Sitting on the edge of the blanket, he observed her eating with that quiet satisfaction only children can show. "My mom used to make milkshakes sometimes," Grant said, barely realizing he was speaking out loud. Callie raised her eyes, curious. "Were they good?" "The best," Grant smiled, and suddenly he was far away. The kitchen was large, with dark wood cabinets and a marble countertop where his mom worked. Grant was 6 years old, sitting on a high stool, watching her put ice cream, milk, and chocolate into the blender. "Do you want to turn it on?" his mom asked, smiling. Grant nodded excitedly. She lifted him so he could reach the button. The blender's roar filled the kitchen, and he laughed, thrilled by the power to turn simple ingredients into something magical. Later, they sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining table his father insisted they use for meals, drinking milkshakes in tall glasses with colorful straws. "Our little secret," his mother whispered with a conspiratorial smile. "Daddy doesn't like sweets before dinner." Grant returned to the present when he felt a light touch on his arm. Callie was looking at him seriously. "Doesn't your mom make milkshakes anymore?" The simple question pierced Grant like an arrow. "No," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "She died when I was little," Callie nodded, with an understanding beyond her years. "That's sad, but at least you have good memories of her." A child without a home, offering comfort to a grown man who had everything. The irony was not lost on Grant. "Yes, I have some good memories. Too few," he thought. "Far too few." "What about your dad?" Callie asked, slurping the last of her milkshake noisily. Grant hesitated. How to explain Richard Foster to a child? "He was busy, worked a lot, like my mom does now." "Not exactly. My dad, he didn't need to work so hard. He chose to." The memory came without warning. Grant was 9 years old. It was his birthday. His mother had been gone 3 years. The house was silent, as it always was after she died. The housekeeper had made a cake, but his father wasn't home to sing happy birthday. He arrived late, as always. "Happy birthday, Grant," his father said, entering the bedroom where Grant was already in bed. "Sorry I'm late. We're expanding the hotel and the meetings just wouldn't end." Grant didn't reply. He pretended to be asleep. His father stood in the doorway for a moment, then left, gently closing the door. He didn't even come in to give him a goodnight kiss. "Grant, are you okay?" Callie's voice brought him back to the present. "I'm fine," he smiled, hiding his emotions. "I just remembered some things. Sad things. Some, yes." Grant watched Callie wipe her hands on a napkin. Her movements were delicate, careful. Like each napkin, each fry was something precious. Another memory surfaced. Grant at 12, sitting at the dining table. Silverware, porcelain plates, crystal glasses. His father at the head of the table, him at the other end. A dinner for 2 at a table that could seat 12. "How was school today?" his father asked, cutting his steak precisely. It was fine, Grant answered, not looking up. Fine isn't an answer, Grant. Be specific. What did you learn? What did you accomplish? I got a perfect score on the math test. That was expected. You're a Foster. No, congratulations. No proud smile. Just the acknowledgement that good performance was mandatory, not something to be celebrated. The rest of the dinner passed in silence, broken only by the clink of cutlery on plates and occasional instructions on etiquette. Elbows off the table, Grant. Chew with your mouth closed, Grant. Posture, Grant. A man is judged by how he presents himself. Looking at Callie now, her face smudged with milkshake without a care, Grant felt a pang of envy. Even in poverty, even living in a car, this child seemed freer than he had ever been. Do you like your job? Callie asked, grabbing another fry. The question caught Grant off guard. Why do you ask? I don't know. You never smile when you talk about it. It was true. Grant tried to remember the last time he felt genuine satisfaction at work. Maybe at the beginning, when he still believed he could make a difference, change his father's legacy, create something more human. It's complicated, he replied. I like parts of it. Which parts? Grant thought for a moment. I like when I can help people have a place to stay. A safe, comfortable place. Like a home. Yes, like a temporary home. Callie nodded thoughtfully. That sounds good. Helping people have a home, even if just for a little while. Something about the simplicity of that observation struck Grant deeply. That's what hotels should be, not just money-making machines, but places that offered comfort, safety, and human warmth. When had he lost that perspective? When had the figures in the spreadsheets become more important than the people in the rooms? The answer came quickly. When his father took full control of his upbringing after his mother died. The hotel chain will be yours one day, Grant, his father always said. You have to learn to be strong, decisive. There's no room for sentimentality in business. By 15, Grant was attending board meetings alongside his father. By 18, he was working part-time in the main hotel's administration while studying business in college. By 21, he had taken over management of one of the properties. Everything was planned, scheduled, predetermined. There was never room for questions, deviations, or real choices. Grant Foster's life was written before he even had the chance to hold it in his own hands. He looked at Callie, now playing with a little paper airplane she had made from a napkin. She flew it over the blanket, making engine sounds with her mouth. She had nothing. She lived in a car. She ate when luck allowed. And yet, there was a freedom about her, a capacity to find joy in the smallest things that Grant deeply envied. What are you thinking about? Callie asked, noticing his gaze. How you manage to smile even when things are so hard? The girl shrugged again, that oddly adult gesture. My mom says we can always choose how we feel inside, even when we can't choose what happens on the outside. The wisdom of those words took Grant by surprise. It was exactly the opposite of what his father had always taught him. Control the outside, ignore the inside. Your mom seems very wise. She is, Callie affirmed proudly. Even when she cries in secret, she's strong. Grant felt a lump in his throat. The image of Callie's mom, a woman he had never met, crying alone so her daughter wouldn't see her despair, moved him deeply. He thought of his own father. Had he ever cried after Grant's mother died? Had he felt the same searing pain of loss? If he did, he never showed it. He just threw himself deeper into work, dragging Grant along with him. Callie went back to playing with her paper airplane. Grant watched her, lost in thought. Suddenly, she looked up and smiled at him, that pure, genuine smile that only children can give. And there, in that simple moment, sitting on a patched blanket in a forgotten park, Grant Foster felt something stir inside him, a warmth that started in his chest and spread, a sensation he couldn't recall having since his mother died. Maybe, just maybe, that little girl who had nothing was giving him the most valuable thing in the world, a chance to heal a past he had always avoided facing. And as he watched Callie play, happy with her paper airplane and a full stomach, Grant knew he would return the next day and the next. And for as many days as it took, not just for her, but for himself, days turned into weeks. Grant Foster, director of the most prestigious hotel chain in the city, now had a routine that no one in his social circle could have imagined. Every day at 3:30 in the afternoon, he left the office. He dismissed his driver, he walked to the park, and he found Callie. In the third week, his secretary began to rearrange his schedule without him having to ask, "Mr. Foster, I moved your afternoon meetings to before 3 p.m," she said, without asking questions. "I noticed you've been leaving at the same time every day." Grant just nodded, grateful for her discretion. He wouldn't know how to explain, even if he wanted to. How could he say that his favorite part of the day was sitting on a patched blanket with a child who lived in a car? That Thursday afternoon, Grant brought something different. Besides the usual snacks, sandwiches, fruits and juice, he carried a small paper bag. "I brought something for you," he said after Callie finished eating. The girl looked at him curiously. Grant pulled a children's book with a colorful cover out of the bag. "You like stories, right? I thought you might like this." Callie's eyes widened. She took the book carefully, as if it were precious and fragile. "Is it mine? Can I keep it?" "Of course you can," Grant smiled. "Do you like to read?" Callie nodded, running her fingers over the shiny cover. "My mom taught me. At the school I used to go to, the teacher said I read better than the others." Grant noticed the "used to" in her sentence, another piece of the puzzle that was Callie's life. "You're not going to school now?" The girl shook her head. "Mom says we'll wait until we have a permanent address again, but she teaches me things. We have some books in the car." Grant felt a tightness in his chest. A smart child like Callie, out of school, another injustice to add to the list. "And where is this car?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Callie looked at him for a moment, deciding whether to trust him with this information. "Behind the Sunrise gas station near the highway, there's a vacant lot there. The owner lets us stay, as long as we don't bother anybody. Sometimes he even lets Mom use the station's restroom." The simplicity with which she described the situation made it even more poignant. For Callie, that was normal now. "Seems like the owner of that station is a good person," Grant commented. "He's nice. He gives Mom coffee in the morning. And he gave me a piece of candy last week." Small acts of kindness that became huge through Callie's eyes. Grant thought of the expensive gifts he received from business associates, the presidential suite he occupied when traveling, the car and driver waiting for him every day. None of that seemed as valuable as a free cup of coffee or a piece of candy in Callie's perspective. "Would you like to read a bit of the book now?" he suggested. Callie opened the book reverently. She began reading out loud, carefully. Sometimes she stumbled over a harder word, but overall she read very well for her age. Grant listened, impressed. "You read really well, Callie," she smiled, proud. "Mom says reading is important. Books can take me far away, even when we can't go anywhere." Another phrase that hit Grant like a punch to the stomach. Rachel, Callie's mom, whom he still hadn't met, seemed to be doing the impossible to shield her daughter from the harshness of their situation. In the following days, Grant continued bringing books. Callie devoured the stories. Sometimes she read to him, other times he read to her. They created a little ritual after lunch, a story after the story, a conversation about the characters, about what Callie had learned, about what she imagined. One of those afternoons, after they finished The Secret Garden, Grant noticed it was almost dark. "I need to go, Callie. It's getting late." The girl put the book in her worn backpack, along with the extra apple and sandwich he always left for her mom. "Will you be back tomorrow?" she asked, as she always did. "I will," Grant answered, as he always did. But this time, something was different. As he helped Callie fold the blanket, Grant made a decision. "Can I walk you to your car today?" "It's getting dark." Callie looked surprised. "You want to meet my mum?" The question was direct, as hers always were. "I think so. If you don't mind." "And if she doesn't mind, of course." Callie considered it for a moment, then shrugged. "I guess it's okay. Mom always says thank you for the sandwiches. Maybe she'd like to thank you in person." They started walking out of the park. Grant noticed how confidently Callie moved, as though she knew the route well. How many times had this little girl walked it alone? The thought disturbed him. "How's your mum doing?" he asked as they walked. "Tired," Callie answered simply. "She walks a lot every day looking for work. Sometimes she comes back late. Sometimes she comes back crying. Grant nodded, unsure of what to say again, struck by Callie's honesty. It must be tough for both of you. It is. But Mom says we've been through hard things before. We'll get through this too. She sounds very strong. She is, Callie said, with obvious pride. She only gets sad when she thinks I'm not watching. They walked for about 20 minutes. They left the downtown area, passed through some residential blocks, then a more industrial section. Grant realized they were heading to a part of the city he rarely visited. Finally, they reached a larger avenue leading to the highway. The Sunrise gas station stood on the corner, its neon sign partially broken. Callie led him behind the station. There was a small vacant lot with tall grass and a few trees. Near the fence separating the lot from the highway was an old blue sedan, paint faded by time. It's right there, Callie pointed. That's our car. Grant felt a lump in his throat. Seeing the car made everything more real. It wasn't just a sad story Callie told, it was her life. As they approached, Grant saw a woman sitting on the car's hood, writing in a notebook. She looked up when she heard footsteps. Relief crossed her face upon seeing Callie, then confusion when she noticed Grant. She was a beautiful woman despite the obvious fatigue. She had the same dark curly hair as Callie, pinned in a makeshift bun. She wore simple jeans and a white blouse, both clean but visibly worn. Her eyes, the same dark tone as her daughter's, carried a mix of strength and exhaustion. "Mom!" Callie ran to her. "I brought Grant with me." "He's the one who always gives me sandwiches." Rachel slid off the hood, closing her notebook. Her posture was tense, on alert. Grant couldn't blame her. A stranger was approaching the only place they had to call home, however precarious. "Hi," Grant said, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm Grant Foster. I've known Callie for a few weeks now at the park. I hope you don't mind my coming here." Rachel studied his face for a moment. Grant could see the gears turning in her mind, assessing any potential threat, considering her limited options. "Rachel Moore," she finally said, extending her hand. "Callie's been talking about you a lot. Thank you for the lunches and the books." Grant shook her hand. Her palm was rough, calloused, hands that worked hard. "The pleasure is mine. Callie is wonderful company." A small smile appeared on Rachel's face. She is indeed. Very talkative when she feels comfortable. "Mom, Grant brought another book today," Callie interjected, pulling The Secret Garden out of her backpack, "and it's just mine. He said I don't have to give it back." Rachel looked at the book, then at Grant. There was an unspoken question in her eyes. "It's just a book," Grant said, seeing her concern. "No strings attached." "That's very kind of you," Rachel replied, still with some caution in her tone. "But I don't want us to feel like—" "Please," Grant interrupted gently. "It's just a book I had. Callie likes to read. It seemed like a perfect match." Rachel nodded, relaxing a bit. "Callie, why don't you go read in the car while I talk with Grant?" The girl seemed disappointed to miss the conversation, but complied. She took the book and got into the car. Grant noticed the back seat, organized with pillows and blankets, forming a kind of makeshift bed. "You've turned that into a home for her," he commented, not realizing he was speaking aloud. Rachel glanced at the car and sighed. "I do what I can with what we have." They stood in silence for a moment, a silence not exactly uncomfortable, but heavy with unasked questions. "Callie told me you used to work in a hotel," Grant said, trying to start a conversation. Rachel nodded, her face showing resignation. "Yes, for 6 years, I was a senior housekeeper at the Grand Palace." Grant felt his heart speed up. The Grand Palace was one of the Foster chain hotels, one of the oldest and most prestigious. "What happened?" he asked, though he feared the answer. "I was laid off during the pandemic staff cuts," Rachel explained, no bitterness in her voice, just stating a fact. "Along with half the housekeeping team, I understand it was necessary. The hotel was almost empty back then." Grant knew exactly what she was talking about. He remembered the meetings, the spreadsheets, the difficult decisions. Back then, it had seemed like just numbers. X% reduction in payroll, Y number of employees let go. Now those numbers had a face, Rachel's, and by extension, Callie's. "I'm sorry," he said, and he truly was. Rachel shrugged, in a gesture that reminded Grant of Callie. That's life. I tried to find another job in the industry, but every hotel was in the same situation. Later, when things improved, they had already hired younger people without kids, more flexible. So you're looking for work now? Every day, she nodded. Anything, really. I can't afford to be picky, but without a fixed address or a reliable phone number, it's tough. And I can't take night shifts because of Callie. Grant thought about the basic requirements his own hotels demanded for hiring: address, phone, references, barriers that seemed simple but became insurmountable for someone like Rachel. How did you... He hesitated, not sure how to phrase the question without sounding invasive. End up living in the car, Rachel finished for him, with a humorless smile. It's the classic story. Lost my job, used my savings to pay rent for a few months. When that ran out, we had to leave. We sold almost everything, kept only what was essential. At least we had the cars, which was already paid off. Lots of people don't even have that. The simplicity with which she narrated her personal tragedy left Grant speechless. There was no self-pity in her voice, only resignation and surprising strength. Do you have any family who could help? Rachel shook her head. My parents died years ago. I have a brother in another state, but he has his own problems. She paused. I don't want to sound ungrateful. Many people have helped us. Mr. Garcia, who owns the gas station, is an angel. He lets us use the bathroom, sometimes gives us food. And now you, with the sandwiches for Callie. It's nothing, Grant said, feeling almost ashamed of how small his gesture was compared to their real needs. Rachel studied him for a moment. Why are you doing this, Grant? Why would a well-dressed, obviously successful man spend his afternoons with a child in a park? The question was direct, blunt. Grant appreciated her honesty. I met Callie by chance, he said. I was passing by the park, saw her alone playing with empty plates. She handed me a note, telling me she was hungry. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, clearly upset. She wrote a note asking for food. Her voice trembled slightly. Yes, Grant said, deciding to be honest. She said she was tired of pretending to eat, that she was really hungry. Rachel turned her face away, but not before Grant saw the pain in her eyes. I thought she was okay, that our little picnic game worked. I always managed to bring something for dinner, but lunches... Grant realized she was fighting back tears, maintaining composure out of pride or habit, or perhaps out of fear of seeming weak in front of a stranger. Callie is an incredible child, he said, wanting to comfort her somehow. Strong, smart, creative. You're doing a great job with her, given the circumstances. Rachel looked back at him with a sad smile. Thanks for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm ruining her life. From what I can see, you're saving her life. Every day. A moment of silence followed. In the distance, the noise of cars on the highway hummed steadily. The sun was beginning to set, casting orange tones across the vacant lot. It's getting late, Rachel remarked. I don't want to take more of your time. It was a polite dismissal. Grant understood she needed space, privacy, in the only place she had left. Sure, he replied. It was a pleasure meeting you, Rachel. Likewise. He took a few steps back, hesitating. I'll be at the park tomorrow, same time as always. If Callie wants to come, she'll love it, Rachel smiled, this time a more genuine smile. Your picnics have been the highlight of her day. Grant nodded, feeling a pang of joy at hearing that. See you tomorrow, then. See you. Grant walked away, heading back toward the city. He looked back once and saw Rachel getting into the car with Callie, the old faded sedan that was now their home. As he walked back to his downtown penthouse apartment, Grant felt something growing inside him. It wasn't just compassion or pity. It was a strong, almost urgent desire to do more, to truly help. Rachel and Callie didn't just need sandwiches and books. They needed a roof over their heads, a job, stability. They needed a chance. And maybe, just maybe, Grant Foster, the director of his father's hotel chain, could do something about it. Grant arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was still quiet, with only a few employees around. He liked it that way. No chatter, no constant interruptions, No stairs following him because he was the founder's son. He sat at his desk and turned on his computer. His thoughts were far from the day's schedule. Since meeting Rachel the day before, he couldn't think about anything else. A former employee of the Foster hotel chain, living in a car with her daughter. The contrast was so brutal it felt physical. Grant felt a weight in his chest, a tightness that wouldn't let him breathe properly. He opened the human resources software, protected by a password only a few in the company had. As a director, Grant had full access to all hotel personnel files. He typed the name into the search field, Rachel Moore. The system took a few seconds to process. Grant tapped his fingers impatiently on the desk. When the results came up, he clicked on the only file that matched. Rachel's photo appeared on the screen. She looked younger, with different hair, smiling for the camera. The contrast with the tired woman he'd met the day before was painful. Name, Rachel Lauren Moore. Position, Senior Housekeeper, Hotel, Grand Palace Hotel, Central Unit. Date of hire, 03/15/2014. Date of separation, 05/22/2020. Reason for separation, staff reduction, code RC19. Grant kept reading. Rachel's performance evaluations were consistently positive. Dedicated employee, meets expectations, punctual, impeccable work. There were guest compliments attached, people specifically mentioning Rachel's good service in their post-stay surveys, 6 years of exemplary service. Then, with a cold line on a cost-cutting spreadsheet, it had all ended. Grant vaguely remembered that time. The pandemic had hit the hospitality sector hard, cancelled reservations, empty hotels, mounting losses. The board of directors, led by his father, decided to implement drastic cuts to weather the storm. At the time, it seemed like the right business decision. Keep the company alive, preserve what was possible, cut what was necessary. Grant had been in those meetings, reviewed those numbers, signed those documents. How many Rachel Moores were on those lists? How many Callies had been affected by decisions made in comfortable rooms by people who would never have to sleep in a car? Grant continued examining the file. He saw that after the layoffs, when the situation improved, the hotel resumed hiring, but not the same employees. The hiring policy had changed. Now they preferred temporary contracts, younger people, childless, available for flexible hours. People who could be easily replaced if another crisis arose. It was financially efficient, but humanly cruel. Grant closed the program and stared at the blank screen. The feeling in his chest had intensified. It wasn't just guilt now, it was anger. At the system, at his father, at himself. He picked up the phone and dialed. Mary, cancel my morning meetings. I have an urgent personal matter. Without waiting for an answer, he hung up, grabbed his suit jacket and left the office in quick strides. The Foster mansion was located on the outskirts of the city, in an exclusive neighborhood with tree-lined streets and properties shielded by tall walls. Grant didn't need to identify himself at the gate. The security guard already knew him. He drove up the long driveway to the main house, an imposing Mediterranean-style structure. Grant parked and sat in the car for a few minutes, steeling himself. Visits to his father were rarely pleasant. At 72, Richard Foster was still the same domineering, unyielding figure who had made Grant's childhood so difficult. Finally, he got out of the car and walked up to the door. The housekeeper answered, greeting him with a warm smile. Mr. Grant, what a nice surprise. Your father is in his study. Thanks, Martha. Is he expecting me? No, but I'm sure he'll be happy to see you. Grant doubted that, but smiled politely and walked down the familiar hallway to his father's study. He knocked and entered without waiting for a response, as he'd always done. Richard Foster was seated behind a massive mahogany desk, surrounded by books he never read and golf trophies he proudly displayed. At 72, he still had the upright posture and piercing gaze that intimidated employees and family alike. Grant, he said, lifting his eyes from the papers he was reviewing. There was no surprise or emotion in his voice, just the statement of a fact. What brings you here during work hours? Grant sat in the chair in front of the desk without being invited. I need to talk to you about something important. Richard took off his reading glasses and set them on the desk, giving Grant his full attention. It was a calculated gesture, Richard Foster knew how to make people feel important when he wanted, just as he knew how to make them feel insignificant when necessary. "I'm listening." Grant took a deep breath, organizing his thoughts. "Do you remember the staff cuts we made during the pandemic, specifically at the Grand Palace?" Richard dismissed the question with a wave of his hand. "Of course, a necessary decision that saved the company." "Why?" "I met one of the employees we laid off, Rachel Moore. Housekeeper, 6 years of service, excellent evaluations." Richard frowned, clearly not recognizing the name. "And?" The coldness of his response ignited something in Grant. "And she and her young daughter are living in a car. They lost everything. The girl doesn't go to school anymore. They barely have food." Richard leaned back in his chair, unaffected. "That's unfortunate, certainly. But what do you expect me to do? We can't be responsible for the fate of every former employee. Business decisions affect people. That's the reality of capitalism." Grant felt his blood boiling. "Business decisions? We're talking about real people, Dad. A woman who worked for us for 6 years, a child who's innocent. They're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Sentimentality doesn't keep companies afloat, Grant. You should know that by now." Richard picked up a pen and twirled it between his fingers, an old habit when he felt annoyed. "If we start making decisions based on sad stories, we'll soon be bankrupt. Then how many more would lose their jobs?" It was the same argument as always, the one Richard used to justify every harsh measure, every unpopular step, every moment he put profit above people. "There's a middle ground between bankruptcy and cruelty," Grant replied, keeping his voice controlled. "We could have set up a rehire program when things got better. We could have offered temporary aid, anything to show we cared about the people who built our company." Richard let out an impatient sigh. "Your soft-heartedness has always been a problem, Grant, just like your mother. She also thought we could save the world, one hug at a time." The mention of his mother hit Grant like a physical blow. Richard rarely spoke of her, and when he did, it was always to belittle her naivety or excessive sensitivity. "My mother had humanity," Grant said through gritted teeth. "Something you seem to have lost along the way, if you ever had it." Richard's eyes hardened. "Watch your tone, Grant. I'm your father, not one of your subordinates. And I'm your son, not one of your employees. But you've always had trouble telling the difference, haven't you?" The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with decades of unspoken resentments. "If you came here to insult me," Richard began. "I came here to understand," Grant interrupted. "To understand how the son of poor immigrants, who built an empire from nothing, can be so indifferent to other people's suffering. How someone who knew poverty can be so cold to those going through the same thing now." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, a rare show of loss of control. "Precisely because I knew poverty. I know what it takes to escape it. Strength, determination, sacrifice, not charity, not handouts. These people need to stand on their own feet, as I did." "You didn't stand on your own feet," Grant countered calmly. "You had help from Mr. Harris, who gave you your first job when no one else would hire immigrants. From Mrs. Peterson, who took care of you when you were sick and had no health insurance. From Mr. Goldstein, who lent you money to open your first hotel when no bank would approve your credit." Richard looked surprised to hear those names from the past. "How do you know about them?" "Mom told me. All the stories you never shared, about how people helped you along the way, about how you promised you'd pay it forward when you could." Richard looked away, visibly uncomfortable. "Those were different times. Times have changed. People haven't. We still need each other. Rachel Moore needs a hand right now, just like you needed one back then." Richard stayed silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less confrontational. "What exactly do you want, Grant?" "I want to rehire her. Not as a favor, but because she's an excellent employee who knows our system. I want to create an assistance program for employees in hardship. I want the Foster chain to be known not just for its profits, but for how it treats people." Richard looked at his son with a mixture of irritation and something that could be interpreted as reluctant respect. "Still the idealist. Just like your mother. Maybe the world needs more idealists and fewer pragmatists right now," Grant replied, not backing down. Richard put his glasses back on, a clear sign the conversation was winding down. Do what you want with your employee, Grant. You're the director now, you have the autonomy. As for the rest, put a proposal together, with numbers, a detailed financial impact, and present it to the board like any other business idea. That's not exactly what I was hoping for. It's the only answer you'll get, Richard said, returning his attention to the papers on his desk. Feelings don't pay bills, Grant. They never have, and they never will. Grant stood up, recognizing the dismissal. Before leaving, he paused at the door and looked at his father. You know the difference between you and me, Dad. You built hotels to escape poverty. I want our hotels to help others escape it. Richard raised his eyes, and for an instant so brief Grant almost missed it. There was something different in his gaze. Not approval, certainly, but maybe a spark of understanding. Good luck with that, he said simply, and turned back to his work. Grant walked out of the mansion with determined steps. The visit hadn't been particularly productive, but it wasn't a complete disaster either. His father hadn't explicitly supported his ideas, but he hadn't vetoed them either. By Richard Foster's standards, that was almost a victory. In the car, Grant adjusted the rearview mirror and saw his own reflection. For the first time in a long while, he felt he was on the right path. That he had finally found a purpose beyond simply running the family business. He picked up his phone and called his secretary. Mary, I need you to schedule a meeting with the HR department for this afternoon and pull the full file for Rachel Moore, please. We're going to rehire her. He hung up and looked at the mansion in the rearview mirror as he drove away. That was the house he grew up in but never truly lived in. That was the man who raised him but never truly knew him. Grant understood the challenge would be enormous. Changing a company culture was almost as hard as changing the character of a man like his father, but for the first time in years, he felt he had a real reason to try. At the Grand Palace Hotel, there would be a position waiting for Rachel Moore. And in the streets of the city, in a car parked behind a gas station, a girl named Callie might finally have the chance at a different future. Grant accelerated toward the office, determined. The name on the spreadsheet now had a face, and that face would change everything. The park looked different that afternoon. The leaves on the trees were beginning to change color, announcing the arrival of fall. A gentle breeze blew, bringing a freshness that hadn't been there in previous weeks. Grant arrived at his usual time, carrying a bag of sandwiches in fruit and 2 boxed juices. He found Callie in their usual spot, sitting on the patched blanket. This time, however, Rachel was also there. Since Grant had met her, she had occasionally started coming to the park, always keeping a respectful distance while he and Callie shared lunch and stories. Grant observed Rachel for a moment before approaching Callie. She was talking with an older woman near the park benches. The older woman was holding some grocery bags, seemingly handing something to Rachel, who received them gratefully. "Hi, Callie," Grant said, sitting at the edge of the blanket. The girl looked up from the paper she was drawing on with a broken-colored pencil. Her face lit up when she saw Grant. "You came." "Of course. I always do, right?" Callie nodded, then turned her attention back to her drawing. Grant noticed she seemed different today, quieter, more reflective. "What are you drawing?" he asked, setting down the bag of food between them. "Our house," Callie replied, showing him the paper. Grant looked at the drawing. It wasn't the car where they currently lived. It was a small, simple house with windows, a door and a chimney with a spiral of smoke. There were 3 people holding hands in front of the house, a woman, a child, and a man. "Who are these people?" Grant asked softly, though he suspected the answer. "Me, Mom, and you," Callie answered, as if it were obvious. "When we have a real house." Grant felt a tightness in his chest. The simplicity with which Callie included him in her imagined future both moved and scared him. "It's a very nice drawing," he said, unsure how to respond to the idea of being in that family. "I know I don't draw very well. My old school had art classes, but now I don't have them." Callie shrugged. "I broke my blue pencil today. It was my favorite." Grant opened the bag, hoping to change the subject. "I brought tuna sandwiches today. Do you like tuna?" "I like everything you bring," Callie said simply, taking the sandwich he offered. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden light across the park. Rachel was still talking with the older woman, now looking through the contents of one of the bags. "That lady sometimes brings us care packages," Callie commented, following Grant's gaze. "She works at a church. It has rice, beans, stuff like that. Mum says it's a blessing." Grant nodded, watching Rachel interact with the woman. There was dignity in how Rachel accepted help, gratitude without humiliation. "Your mum is a strong person, Callie." The girl kept eating, but her eyes went distant, as though deep in thought. "Grant," she finally said, placing the rest of her sandwich on a napkin, "can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" There was a seriousness in her voice that made Grant put his own sandwich aside. "Of course, Callie. You can tell me anything." She looked at him, hesitant, as though deciding if she could truly trust him with what she was about to say. "My mom always says everything's going to be fine, that she'll get another job. That we're just going through a hard time, but I've seen her crying." The simplicity of the confession hit Grant hard. He kept his face neutral, not wanting to show how much those words affected him. Callie lowered her head and continued, "Sometimes she waits until I'm asleep, but I hear her. She cries quietly. I pretend to be asleep so she won't get even sadder." Callie gulped. "I'm afraid no one else will hire her, that we'll stay like this forever." Grant looked again at Rachel in the distance, still talking to the church volunteer. He pictured her crying alone in the car, trying to muffle the sound so Callie wouldn't hear. The thought felt like a punch to the gut. "Do you think I should tell her I know?" Callie asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Maybe she'll stop crying if she knows I don't believe that everything will be fine." Grant felt a knot in his throat. The girl's gaze, both strong and fragile, cut through him like a fine blade. How could such a young child carry such a heavy burden? How could she be so aware of her mother's pain and so concerned about protecting her? "Callie," Grant began, choosing his words carefully, "I think your mum cries not because she doesn't believe things will get better, but because it's hard while they haven't. Sometimes adults need to cry too. Even the strong ones like my mom. Especially the strong ones. They carry more weight." Callie nodded as if that made sense. "So I should keep pretending I don't know." "That's something only you can decide, Callie. But maybe your mom needs that moment for herself, to be just Rachel, not just Callie's strong mom." The girl remained silent, absorbing his words. Grant wanted to hug her, protect her, assure her everything would truly be okay. But he knew Callie deserved more than empty promises. "Callie, your mom is an amazing woman. And so are you. I know you won't stay like this forever. There are people who care, and I'm one of them." She smiled halfway, her eyes misty. "Will you really help her for real?" The question was simple, direct, with no subtext. Exactly the kind of question only a child would ask, expecting an equally direct answer. "I promise," he said firmly, "and I won't leave you two alone." It was more than a promise to calm a child. It was a commitment Grant made to himself. Something had shifted in him since meeting Callie and Rachel. He could no longer be just the hotel director, worried about profits and occupancy. He had to be the man Callie saw, someone who could make a difference, who truly cared. Callie nodded, looking relieved. She picked up her sandwich again, taking bigger bites now, as if a weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. "I drew you really tall," she commented, pointing at the drawing. "Because you are." Grant smiled, grateful for the lighter topic. "And you drew me smiling. Because you smile more now. At first you almost never smiled." It was true. Grant hadn't realized how much his own demeanor had changed since he started coming to the park, as though Callie's presence had melted something inside him. Rachel was now walking back over, waving goodbye to the church volunteer. She carried a bag that seemed to contain basic groceries. "Don't tell her what I said, okay?" Callie whispered quickly. "I won't," Grant promised. "It'll stay between us." They remained silent, side by side, watching the sun sink behind the trees. For Callie, this simple moment meant everything, and for Grant, it was the beginning of something that would change his life forever. Rachel approached, smiling at them both. "I hope I'm not interrupting the picnic." "Not at all," Grant replied, standing to help her with the bag. "We were just enjoying the sunset." Callie stored her drawing in her worn backpack, though not before Grant noticed she had added a detail: a small sun shining over the house and the three figures holding hands. A light rain was falling that Wednesday afternoon. Rachel sat in the driver's seat of the old blue sedan, reading a used book Grant had brought her the day before. Callie was asleep in the back seat, curled under a thin blanket, breathing softly. 2 weeks had passed since Grant had entered their lives, and small changes were already visible. Callie's backpack now held children's books. Her small box of non-perishable food sat in the trunk. The car's gas tank was always full. Grant insisted on helping with fuel, and after much resistance, Rachel had accepted. It wasn't just material support. It was human warmth, consistent presence, someone who cared. Rachel still couldn't fully grasp why a successful man like Grant Foster spent so much time on them, but she had stopped questioning. In her current life, she couldn't afford to turn away kindness. As she turned a page of the book, her phone rang, the sound strangely loud in the cramped car. It was an old model car with a battery that barely lasted half a day. She kept it off most of the time, saving power for emergencies. Very few people had that number. She looked at the screen. An unknown number, probably another rejection for a job, she thought. In recent days, she had handed out resumes everywhere possible. Restaurants, shops, laundromats, anywhere that might hire someone without a fixed address. She hesitated before answering. She hated another polite no, but she couldn't afford to miss any possibility, however slim. "Hello?" she answered quietly, so as not to wake Callie. "Ms. Rachel Moore?" a female voice asked on the other end. "Yes, that's me." "Mrs. Moore, this is reception at the hotel where you used to work. The manager asked me to inform you that we're reopening some positions. Your name was at the top of the list. We'd like to know if you're interested in returning." Rachel froze. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. The Grand Palace Hotel, one of the city's most elegant, where she had worked for 6 years before being laid off during the pandemic. They were offering her job back. "Miss Moore, are you still on the line?" Rachel realized she had been silent too long. Yes, of course I'm interested. Thank you so much. I don't even know what to say." Her hands trembled as she held the phone. She felt a knot in her throat, a mix of relief and disbelief. "Great," the voice continued. "Could you come in tomorrow at 9 a.m. to finalize the details? Just ask for Mr. Roberts at reception." "I'll be there," Rachel confirmed, her voice still trembling. "Thank you for the opportunity." "See you tomorrow then." The call ended, and Rachel stared at the phone in her hand as though it might disappear at any moment. A job. Her old job. After more than a year living on the brink, surviving on odd jobs and charity, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. A small movement in the back seat caught her attention. Callie was waking up, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Who was it, Mum?" she asked in a hoarse, just-awake voice. Rachel turned to her daughter, unable to contain the smile spreading across her face. "It was the hotel, honey. They want me to come back." Callie's eyes went wide, confusion first, then realization. Really? They actually called? There was so much hope in her voice, but also a carefulness, as if she were afraid to believe too much and be disappointed. Rachel knew that feeling well. It mirrored her own heart at that moment. Rachel held out her arms, and Callie clambered into the front seat, bridging the gap between them with a child's nimble ease. "We're gonna get out of this. I promise," Rachel whispered, holding her daughter close, feeling the warmth of her small body. They stayed like that for a long moment, hugging in the quiet car, with the soft rain drumming on the roof. It was a perfect moment, one Rachel knew she'd hold on to forever, no matter what happened next. "Can we tell Grant?" Callie asked, still in her mother's embrace. Rachel smiled. Of course, Callie's first thought was to share the news with Grant. In the past weeks, he had become a steady presence in their lives, especially for Callie. "Sure. We'll see him at the park tomorrow, like always." "He'll be so happy," Callie said with the confidence of a child who felt she knew someone well. "He will," Rachel agreed. Lying in the back seat that night, Callie breathing softly beside her, Rachel couldn't sleep. Her mind buzzed with possibilities. A steady paycheck, maybe a small apartment soon, Callie going back to school. Simple things most people took for granted, but that for them had become distant dreams. Something didn't quite add up, though. Why would the hotel call her back now after so long? Why would her name be at the top of the list, especially given how the hospitality industry usually worked? They generally preferred new hires, younger, more flexible, no dependents. The most obvious answer made her heart race. Grant. He worked with hotels. He'd mentioned it several times. Could he have some connection with the Grand Palace? Might he have used his influence to get her the job? Rachel pushed the thought away. She didn't want to believe all his kindness was just a setup for this kind of hidden charity. She preferred to believe the hotel valued her for the work she'd done for 6 years. The next morning, Rachel got up early, putting on the best clothes she still owned, a pair of black slacks and a simple white blouse, both clean and well ironed, thanks to a borrowed iron from the church volunteer. She put her hair in a neat bun and applied a little lipstick, the only makeup item she hadn't sold. She left Callie at the park, where the girl would read her books until Grant arrived, as they'd done for several weeks. "Behave, okay?" she said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "I'll be back as soon as the interview's done." "You'll do great, Mom," Callie assured her with a confidence that warmed Rachel's heart. Hours later, when Rachel returned to the park, she found Grant and Callie sitting on the usual blanket, playing an improvised card game. When they saw her, both looked up simultaneously. "Mom, how was it?" Callie asked, jumping to her feet. Rachel couldn't hide her smile. "I got it. I start on Monday." Callie squealed with delight and ran to hug her mother. Grant stood more slowly, a discreet smile on his lips. "That's wonderful, Rachel. Congratulations." There was something in his eyes, a quiet satisfaction Rachel couldn't fully decipher. It was almost as if he already knew this would happen. "Thank you," she said, studying his face. It was a surprise when they called. Apparently they're rehiring some former staff. "They said my name was at the top of the list." Grant nodded, his expression showing only happiness for her news. "Makes sense. Smart companies value experienced, dedicated employees." "Grant, did you have something to do with this?" Rachel asked directly, unable to keep the doubt at bay. He seemed momentarily taken aback, then shook his head slightly. "All the credit is yours, Rachel. It always was." Rachel wasn't entirely convinced, but decided not to press. For now, she just wanted to savor the moment, the sense of relief and hope she hadn't felt in so long. "We have to celebrate," Callie exclaimed, bouncing around them. "Let's have a special picnic." Grant smiled. "That's a great idea. How about tomorrow? I'll bring something special." As Callie chatted excitedly about what she wanted for their celebration picnic, Rachel watched Grant. There was something different about him, a serenity, a profound sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere pleasure at good news. For him, Rachel now realized, it was important that she be chosen for what she'd always been: dedicated, capable, indispensable, not as a charity case, not as a personal favor, but for her own worth. And in that moment, no matter what role he might have played in the unexpected call, Rachel felt a gratitude that words could barely express. Rachel accepted the job. Despite the revelation about Grant, despite the feeling of betrayal, she couldn't afford to say no, not when Callie needed stability, not when the alternative was staying in a car. Her first days back at the Grand Palace were a mix of familiarity and strangeness. The crisp uniform, the elegant hallways, the routine of checking rooms, changing linens, restocking amenities. Her muscles remembered every motion as if she'd never left. It was like fitting back into a place her body hadn't forgotten. Her co-workers received her with subdued warmth. Some faces were new, but many were familiar. People she had worked alongside for years. Nobody mentioned the car, the precarious situation, the time she'd spent on the streets. It was as if that hard period was just an interval, a chapter everyone preferred to skip. But something was different. The looks, the whispers, the conversations that ended when she approached. Rachel knew exactly what they were thinking. Why her? Why, among all the former employees, had Rachel Moore been chosen to return? The answer lay in the name everyone avoided saying around her, Grant Foster. Rachel deliberately avoided him. She'd learned to spot the signs of his presence at the hotel, murmurs among the managers, a subtle tension in the air, everyone on their best behavior. When she sensed those signs, she found tasks on other floors in different departments, anywhere she could avoid running into him. She wasn't ready. The revelation was too fresh. The feeling of having been observed, studied, without her knowledge still stung like an open wound. She needed time, space to organize her thoughts. On the fourth day, she received her first early paycheck. Policy for rehires, the manager said. Rachel knew there was no such policy. It was Grant, again, trying to help without appearing intrusive. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain her pride. But the practical side, the mother who needed to care for her daughter, accepted without protest. With that money, she rented a small room in the back of an elderly lady's house. It wasn't much, just a simple space with a double bed, a tiny bathroom, and a small cooking area with a 2-burner stove. But it had solid walls, a leak-free roof, and a door that locked. After months in the car, it felt like a palace. When she took Callie to see the place, the girl ran through the cramped space in pure delight. "We have a house," she shouted, jumping on the bed. "A real house." That night, lying on an actual bed under a safe roof, Rachel allowed herself, for the first time in a while, to cry softly. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, gratitude, and confusion. How was she supposed to handle the fact that all of this, her job, her home, renewed security, came from a man she thought she knew, who had hidden such a crucial part of who he was? The days at the hotel followed a steady routine. Rachel worked with the same excellence she always had. Her supervisors praised her performance as though she had never left. But she felt the stares, the unasked questions about her connection to the young director. Almost 2 weeks went by without her seeing Grant. She heard occasional comments that he was traveling, in important meetings, handling the chain's expansion. A part of her wondered if he was avoiding the hotel on purpose, giving her the space she'd requested. Callie, however, asked about him constantly. "When are we going to see Grant again?" she asked often. "I miss our picnics." Rachel deflected, made excuses, said he was busy, but the truth was that she missed him too, missed the easy conversations, the way he made Callie laugh, the sense of not being utterly alone in her struggle. One Sunday afternoon, her day off, Callie became restless in the small room. "Can we go to the park?" she asked, peering out the narrow window. "That park, our park." Rachel hesitated. The park meant memories, meant the possibility of running into Grant. "I'm not sure, Callie. We could go somewhere else. There's a little playground nearby, but I want to go to our park," Callie insisted with that determination that sometimes surprised Rachel. "We haven't been there in ages." Rachel sighed. She couldn't avoid the park forever, just as she couldn't avoid Grant. Maybe it was time to face whatever needed facing. "Okay," she finally conceded. "We can go, but just for a bit." The park was crowded that Sunday. Families on the grass, children running, couples strolling. It was a snapshot of normalcy Rachel had lost for so long. Callie pulled her by the hand, eager to reach the spot where they used to meet Grant, and then there he was, sitting on the same bench as always, a book open on his lap, apparently absorbed in reading. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, nothing that revealed his true position. He looked more like the Grant from the park than the director of a hotel. Before Rachel could react, Callie let go of her hand and ran ahead. "Grant," she called, waving excitedly. He looked up, surprised. His face lit up at the sight of Callie, but his eyes quickly shifted to Rachel's, uncertainty clouding his expression. He closed the book and stood, unsure whether to move forward or stay put. Callie reached him first, throwing her arms around his legs with childlike enthusiasm. Grant smiled, returning the hug, but his gaze remained on Rachel, who approached slowly. "Rachel, it's good to see you," he said, his voice controlled, each word measured. She looked at him seriously, not backing down. "I'm still trying to understand. Everything was so hidden. You had your reason, I know, but I needed trust. And you took that from me. There was no accusation in her voice, just a painful truth. Grant lowered his gaze, accepting the reproach without defense. I made a mistake, not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was afraid it would look like I was just doing charity, that I didn't see your true worth. I wanted you to have the chance without knowing it came from me. Sensing the tension between the adults, Callie stepped aside to play with some fallen leaves on the grass. Rachel watched her for a moment, seeing how her daughter laughed at something so simple, how she found joy where many would find none. It was a lesson Rachel realized she needed to learn again. She likes you, a lot, and I know you care about us. It was a hard admission, but true. Despite her hurt, Rachel knew Grant's care was genuine. The stories of his own childhood, the way he treated Callie, the respect he had always shown her, even at her lowest. None of that could be faked by someone with ulterior motives. Grant took a small step forward, closing the distance between them. Give me a chance to show you that all this, the hotel, the care, what we've built, was real. Rachel glanced again at Callie, who was now stacking leaves, fully absorbed in her game. She thought about how the girl asked about Grant every day, how her face lit up when she talked about him, how he had become an important, positive presence in their difficult life. Would it be fair to deny her daughter that because of her own wounded pride? Rachel hesitated for a few more seconds. Then she gave a simple nod. All right, but let's do it the right way. No secrets. The relief on Grant's face was evident, as though a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. No secrets, he promised with a gentle smile. That day, they didn't have an elaborate picnic like the ones before. No meticulously prepared sandwiches or boxed juices. They just sat together on the grass, under the shade of a large tree. Grant pulled out a package of cookies from his pocket, opened it and offered it around. They shared that simple snack in silence, watching the people in the park, the sun lowering on the horizon, life moving around them. To Rachel, that simple moment meant far more than a casual meeting. It was the beginning of something new, built on more honest ground. A restart she hadn't expected but now found possible. As she watched Callie and Grant quietly discussing the shapes of clouds in the sky, Rachel allowed herself, for the first time, to consider that perhaps the truth, as painful as it had initially been, could open the way to something real, something that needed no masks or half-truths, and for now that possibility was enough. The apartment was on the third floor of an old building with no elevator. The stairs were narrow, their steps worn down by decades of use. Rachel climbed slowly, carrying one of their suitcases, while Callie bounded ahead with a light bag, barely able to contain her excitement. Are we almost there? She asked for the third time, stopping at the landing to wait for her mom. Yes, it's on the next floor, Rachel answered with a tired smile. It wasn't a luxury place, not even close. A small apartment with 2 bedrooms, a modest living room, a compact kitchen, and a single bathroom. The rent was affordable precisely because it was an old building in an unpretentious neighborhood. The walls needed fresh paint, some tiles were cracked, and the windows let in a draft on cold days. But as Rachel reached the 3rd floor, set the suitcase down, and took the key from her pocket, she felt something she hadn't in more than a year, the weight and meaning of having a place to call their own. She turned the key in the lock and pushed the door, which opened with a faint creak. Can we go in now? Callie asked, impatient. Yes, Rachel replied softly. This is our new home. The word our carried special significance. After so long without a fixed address, they finally had a place that was theirs, where they could stay without fear of being kicked out or bothered. Callie dashed inside, her small footsteps echoing on the wooden floor of the empty living room. It's huge, she exclaimed, spinning with arms wide open. Rachel smiled, watching her daughter. The apartment was actually quite small, but for someone who had been confined to the back seat of a car, any space seemed immense. She brought in the 2 suitcases that held everything they owned, some clothes, important documents, a few books and toys of Callie's they hadn't sold, family photos kept like treasures. They were lucky with the landlord, an elderly man touched by their story, who left some basic furniture, a table with 4 chairs in the kitchen, a double bed in the larger bedroom, a single bed in the smaller one, a worn but clean couch in the living room, and a simple shelf. The rest Rachel bought gradually with her new salary: bedding, towels, kitchen utensils, hygiene items, and most importantly, groceries for the pantry. Callie was already exploring each room, opening and closing doors, switching lights on and off. "Which one's my room?" she shouted from down the hallway. Rachel approached and pointed to the door on the right. "This one. Let's see if you like it." The room was small, big enough for the single bed, a bedside table, and a built-in closet. The window overlooked an internal courtyard, no grand view, but enough natural light during the day. Callie burst inside like a whirlwind and immediately jumped on the bed, testing the mattress with little bounces. "I have a bed just for me," she exclaimed, eyes shining, "and a whole room." Rachel leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter's joy. For most children, having their own room was normal, expected. For Callie, after months spent curled up in a car's back seat, it was an unimaginable luxury. "Can I put my things in here now?" she asked, already opening the small closet. "Sure, sweetheart. I'll start organizing the kitchen." She left the smaller suitcase in Callie's room and took the other to the main bedroom. She had no time to explore her own space. The priority was to make a decent dinner, to celebrate their first night in the new place. In the kitchen, Rachel began unpacking the groceries she'd bought earlier. It wasn't much, but it felt like a treasure once out of reach. Rice, beans, cooking oil, salt, and other basics. Some fresh vegetables, eggs, and as a small luxury for the special occasion, a whole chicken to roast. She also bought cleaning supplies, a small plant for the kitchen windowsill, and for Callie a box of colored pencils and a sketchbook. There was something profoundly soothing and healing about placing each item in its place. Plates and cups in cabinets, utensils in drawers, food in the pantry, ordinary routines that symbolized the return to normal life, stability, dignity. As she worked, she heard Callie running through the apartment, exploring every corner, every detail, every new possibility. "Mom, we have a real shower. Look, you can see the street from the living room window. There's a light switch in every room." Rachel smiled at her daughter's discoveries. Simple, basic things turned into marvels by someone who hadn't had them for so long. When she finished in the kitchen, Rachel started preparing dinner. She cleaned the chicken, seasoned it with garlic, onion, lemon, and herbs. She washed the rice, set the beans to cook, and cut vegetables for a salad. Familiar motions she hadn't done in so long, since she lost her old apartment and everything else. In the car, meals were always makeshift. Cold food, snacks if they had money, or donated meals. The luxury of making a complete hot dinner in a real kitchen felt almost surreal. The aroma of cooking filled the apartment. Rachel opened the windows to let in the evening breeze. It was autumn, and the trees on the street displayed leaves of gold and red. Callie came back into the kitchen holding one of the books Grant had given her. "Can I stay here while you cook?" she asked, pulling out a chair. "Of course you can." The girl settled at the table and opened the book. Though she wasn't really reading, her eyes wandered around the room, taking in every detail as if committing the scene to memory, being at home. "We have a table," she exclaimed suddenly, as though just noticing. "And a real bed!" Rachel laughed. "Yes, we have a table and beds and a couch and so on. And walls, real walls, not the ones in the car." The girl got up and touched the kitchen wall, running her fingers over the slightly rough surface, feeling its solidity. Rachel felt a knot in her throat. Callie's happiness over such basic things was both beautiful and heartbreaking. No child should be amazed by having walls around them, a roof overhead. Those should be guaranteed, not luxuries. But there was no bitterness in that moment, only gratitude for having survived, for staying together, for finding their way back to stability. When dinner was ready, Rachel set the table with care. No fine china or embroidered tablecloths, just simple plates, utensils, and glasses, but all clean. She served them generous portions: fluffy white rice, dark, fragrant beans, golden roasted chicken, and fresh salad. "Come, Callie. It's ready." The girl closed her book and sat down, eyes wide at the simple feast. "All this is ours." "Yes, sweetie. All ours. Callie closed her eyes, smiling before taking her first bite. This is the best smell in the world. Rachel watched her daughter eat with appetite and delight, savoring every bite as if it were the finest meal ever made. And, in that moment, it was. The taste didn't just come from the ingredients, it came from freedom, safety, the feeling of finally being home. For the first time in a long while, Rachel wasn't worried about tomorrow. She wasn't wondering where their next meal would come from, or if they'd have to move again, or if someone would knock on the car window in the middle of the night. There was food in the kitchen, a door that locked, and rent paid for the first month. And the dreams she had buried, those she feared to even imagine, were now sprouting again. She could think about enrolling Callie in a local school, about buying a vase of flowers for the living room, about inviting Grant over for dinner someday to thank him, now that the sting of his secret was slowly healing. Small plans for a future that, for the first time in a long time, felt possible. Thank you, Mom, for not giving up. Callie's voice was small but carried a depth beyond her years. Rachel's eyes moistened. How could she explain to a child that there had been moments she almost did give up? That there were nights, with Callie sleeping in the back seat, when she'd stared at the dark sky wondering if she could go on. That the pain, fear, and humiliation almost broke her many times. Rachel reached out and gently held her daughter's hand. Thank you, sweetheart, for giving me strength when I almost lost mine. It was true. In the darkest times, Callie had been the reason she kept going. The need to protect her child, to ensure Callie had a chance at life, was what prevented her from surrendering. They continued eating in a comfortable silence, simply savoring the meal, the security, the precious simplicity of that moment. They were celebrating not only the food, but also the safety, the dignity, and the love that had endured everything. Later, after the dishes were washed and put away, after the kitchen was cleaned, Rachel prepared a bath for Callie. Another simple luxury, a warm bath without rushing, in a real bathtub, not in a public gas station bathroom or a restaurant sink. Look at all the bubbles, Callie squealed, plunging her hands into the foamy water. Rachel smiled, watching her daughter splash around as though it were her first bath. In a way, it was the first in a long time, with genuine comfort and safety. After the bath, with Callie dressed in clean pajamas, Rachel led her to her bedroom. The bed was made with new sheets and a soft blanket. It wasn't luxurious, but it was far beyond the car seat. Can I read a bit before sleeping? Callie asked, already climbing under the covers. Just for a little while. It's late. Rachel turned on the small lamp on the nightstand. Another little luxury, having a light on at night without worrying about draining a car battery. She kissed Callie on the forehead and left, leaving the door slightly open. She returned to the kitchen and poured herself a cup of tea, carrying it to the living room. She sat on the couch, simply taking in the silence, the safety, the indescribable feeling of truly being home, a real home. Small, simple, imperfect, but theirs, a place to restart, to heal old wounds, to build new memories. A starting point for a life that, at last, was open to possibilities again. Tomorrow, there would be more to tidy, more to organize. Enrolling Callie in a nearby school, settling into her new work routine at the hotel, the little daily challenges of rebuilding their lives from scratch. But tonight, in this moment, there was only gratitude for the safe roof, the locked door, the food in the pantry, the job that had offered her a second chance, for Callie sleeping soundly in her own bed, and, yes, also for Grant, who, despite his mistakes, had reached out a hand when they needed it most. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of home-cooked food still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of soap and freshly laundered clothes, the smell of normalcy, dignity, hope, the smell of a real home. The sun shone brightly that Sunday in the fall. The trees in the park displayed leaves in golden and reddish hues, and a gentle breeze occasionally shook the branches, sending a light shower of dried leaves onto the green grass. Grant arrived early, carrying 2 large baskets and a backpack. He chose the spot carefully, the same peaceful corner where he'd first found Callie, under the generous shade of an old oak tree. He spread out a red and white checkered blanket on the grass, so different from the patched blanket he'd seen in the beginning. Methodically, he began arranging what he had brought. He took from the baskets plastic containers of salads, various sandwiches wrapped in parchment paper, fresh sliced fruit, still warm artisan bread, homemade cakes, assorted cheeses. From the backpack, he pulled out thermoses of coffee, natural juices, and fresh water. Lastly, he placed a small vase of wildflowers in the center of the blanket. He looked at the end result and smiled, satisfied. It was more than just food. It was a celebration, a symbol of everything that had changed in their lives over the past few months. As he finished the final details, he saw Rachel and Callie walking down the stone path. The difference in them was evident, even from a distance. Rachel walked with her head held high, no longer weighed down by that invisible burden. She wore a simple but lovely dress, her hair tied with a colorful scarf. Callie bounded at her side, wearing denim overalls and new sneakers, her small backpack on her shoulders. When they spotted the picnic already laid out, both slowed in surprise. Callie recovered first, running the last few yards in excitement. "Wow, it's a feast!" she exclaimed, stopping at the edge of the blanket, eyes wide at the abundance. Grant laughed, delighted by her reaction. "I thought it would be nice for us to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Callie asked, already kneeling on the blanket to examine each item in curiosity. "Everything," Grant replied simply. "Your new apartment, you going back to school, your mom's job, everything." Rachel approached more slowly, visibly touched but maintaining her characteristic reserve. She gave Grant a warm, genuine smile. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I figured it was time we do this the right way." Rachel settled beside him, taking in the bounty of food. It was impossible not to remember that very first time Grant saw Callie, a hungry child, pretending to eat from empty plates. Grant poured each of them a cup of juice. "This is carrot orange," he said, handing a cup to Callie, "and grape for you, Rachel. I made it this morning." "You made all this?" Rachel asked in surprise. "Well, not everything. The bread is from the bakery down the street, and the cheeses are from a specialty shop. But the rest, yes, I found out I like cooking." He shrugged, almost shyly. "Something else I learned from you two." Conversation flowed naturally as they ate. No tension, no secrets, no fears. Just three people sharing a meal beneath the autumn sun. Callie chatted excitedly about her new school, which she had started 2 weeks ago. "My teacher says I'm good at math, and there's a huge library with more books than I can read." Rachel talked about her little victories at work, a promotion to floor supervisor, recognition for her dedication, plans to do a hotel management course in the evenings. "The manager said I can advance if I keep it up. Maybe even work in administration one day." Grant listened more than he spoke, content just to be there, watching the transformation in the two lives that had touched his own so deeply. From time to time, he glanced at the exact spot where Callie had sat that first day, with her empty plates and a desperate note. Life sometimes changed in an instant, with seemingly small decisions. If he had chosen a different route that day, or ignored a lonely child in the park like so many probably had. "What are you thinking?" Rachel asked, noticing his distant gaze. "About how small decisions can change everything," he answered honestly. She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. After the meal, Callie, bursting with energy, spotted some butterflies near a flower bed and ran off to observe them. Rachel and Grant remained seated side by side, comfortable in the silence. Grant was the one to break it, his voice serene. "You know, this place has taught me a lot. When I first met you two, I thought I was helping, but I was the one who got saved. The truth is, I needed to remember what really matters. I never had my father's affection. He was always cold, distant. My mom died when I was a boy. Since then, it's just been work, expectations, silence. I grew up believing being alone was normal." He paused, watching Callie chase the butterflies, laughing when they flitted from her reach. Then he turned back to Rachel. "But now I know what it's like to have a family, to have people to share meals, quiet moments, life with. You taught me that." And I'm grateful for every day with you. Rachel, moved by his sincerity, placed her hand briefly on his, a gesture of contained but profound tenderness. Sometimes life flips us upside down so we can see where the right side is. Grant smiled, recognizing the simple wisdom of her words. They perfectly summed up the journey of the three of them. A wealthy man with ample resources but poor in connection, a woman and a child, rich in love but robbed of the basics to survive. Their meeting that changed everyone. Callie ran back, cheeks flushed from running, small grass stains on her hands and the knees of her overalls. She threw herself onto the blanket between them, laughing loudly. "There are so many butterflies," she exclaimed, grabbing a piece of chocolate cake. "They're so fast." She bit into the cake with gusto, crumbs gathering at the corners of her mouth, not caring about the dirt on her hands. She was just a child being a child. Free, happy, safe. Grant and Rachel exchanged a glance over Callie's head, a look filled with understanding, gratitude, and something else unspoken but growing stronger every day. In that instant, under the gentle shade of the old tree and on the picnic blanket laden with shared food, something became clear to all three. True riches weren't in the hotels or bank accounts, not in luxury cars or upscale apartments. They were right there in that moment, in the ability to share not only a meal, but also joys, sorrows, and silences. In the strength of the bonds they had formed, not through obligation but by choice. That was the inheritance that truly mattered, the legacy Grant wanted to build, the security Rachel had fought to give Callie, the love that, in unexpected ways, had found its way among them. And at last, this was the real picnic. Not a sad game with empty plates, but a genuine celebration of full bellies, happy hearts, and possible futures. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.